we need communities to be self-sustaining and have its own ecosystems. And I actually think that COVID and new technology has brought us back to those old terms, right? So when you're talking about making America great, it's because that people were able to, like, we also have the analogy of, pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. Well, inside of a community, you have access to all of those things. It's when you feel like you have to go outside the community to get those things met.
This is Joseph Ring. I'm a cattle feedlot operator in Northern Illinois, and you're listening to the Vance Crow Podcast.
Chauncey Nelson, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So you are a developer here in St. Louis. You live in the same area that my buddy Ben, who bought a house for, I think, $10,000 because it was, dilapidated and worn down, and now he has built it into a home. And but there's not very many people out in this part of the world. What makes you decide that you want to build out in such a dilapidated part of St. Louis?
Oh, man. So I guess I have to start with my career. So I'm a social worker by trade. And when I was getting my master's degree over at Washington University here in St. Louis, one of the things that I recognized was we were putting Band-Aids on bullet wounds across different services and the services that were provided for individuals and families and youth is where I really kind of focused my tenure on prior to grad school. So coming out of that piece, I was like, these communities need way more than the resources that we're providing them. They need a full-on approach to an ecosystem. From there, I started looking at buying homes in low-income areas. Turned into me being an acquisitions manager for a syndication and recognizing, hey, we can really have a greater impact if we afford them quality housing. So statistics, and I'm a research guy. So statistics says that if you like where you live, whether it be your community and neighborhood, your morale automatically goes up and you have a better outcome on life. So I was like, if we just focus on the housing piece, and people always need somewhere to stay, that's not a resource, that's a basic need, then we're going to automatically help change and shift lives. Which at about 3 years in, we had an opportunity come through our neighborhood where a group of developers wanted to come into our neighborhood. I had been in that neighborhood for the longest, never wanted to move. I always had pride in our community, and they had already had an assembled team, a group of people that were doing the work. Your friend Ben, now my friend also, was one of the members on that team. We just kind of had a natural mesh and been kind of flourishing, doing the work together along with some of the other people on that team to try to transition that neighborhood, right? In the real estate terms, they call them war zones. In the community development terms, we call it transitioning neighborhoods. So we're trying to make sure we dive on in and hit all those components from a community development standpoint so people can enjoy where they stay and get their basic needs met right where they live.
So why social work? That seems like a weird thing for a guy that's like, I want to get in and do houses and develop things.
Actually, it fell in my lap. It had nothing to do with, I think that's just life, right? You have to think of the natural migration of life. I was a finance guy. I was going to school to do finance, supply chain more specifically. And I took a job over the summer at a children's youth camp. I fell in love. I literally came out of that summer job and said, I'm doing something with youth. Talked to a couple of my mentors, and it was either going to be counseling or social work. Found out I had a wider range of motion in social work, so I chose that. Naturally, it took me back to something having to do with be more lucrative in being real estate, but I could also help people in the process.
I actually worked at a camp for inner city kids when I was coming. I actually did it in high school, and then I did it again right after college. And that was a life-changing experience for me because doing it as a high school kid, you're just trying to be the cool counselor, right? You just want to be the one that's well-liked. I was a lifeguard, But then when I was coming out of college, I was like, wait, these kids will one day grow up, right? And you're experiencing kids that have a totally different way of interacting with one another, with adults or, the authority figures than anything I had ever seen. And that had a profound influence on me.
No, definitely, right? And so I think that was kind of where I was at, right? So I was halfway through I was actually just diving into my concentration into undergrad. And I was halfway through school, and I was good at the financial classes. I was good at, all the micro and macroeconomics, but it just didn't. It wasn't something I really enjoyed. I just run through the work, get a good grade, and on to the next course, looking for the internship. And I went to a Jesuit university, so we had to do some volunteer work. And so for me to hit my hours, I was like, let me be smart. I'm gonna knock them all out in one time over the summer, and that's how I ended up falling in love with doing something in the local community. Worked at the summer camp. They always needed additional hands on deck at the rec center, and for some reason, I left there happier than any dollar amount I had ever made previous to that part. And I said, this must be it. So I when I called some of my old friends and I was like, yo, I think I might be going to social work, do some stuff with some kids. It was funny, one of my childhood friends said, well, I could have told you that. And he's like, we used to call you the counselor in high school. So it was like, it's funny how those natural progressions always brings you back around full circle later on in life. And I think that's what happened for me.
What I saw when I was there was kids would go from like happy playing, great time, laughter to instantaneous, it would seem almost, that they would get into a fight or they would be ready to throw down, like on the scale that when I was a kid, you would at least see this progression lead up, and it would maybe only happen once a month, maybe once every 2 months. But this was happening like multiple times a day. And one of the conclusions I came to, but I'd be very interested in hearing your perspective on this, is a lot of those kids didn't have the language to describe different emotions they were feeling, right? So they had, I'm angry. They had, I'm embarrassed, right? And they maybe didn't even know the word embarrassed, but they would feel that, right? So they were feeling this range of emotions, but they only had, instead of having a dial where they could change it or check different dials at the same time, it was very clunky. It was happy, angry, happy, embarrassed. And that seemed to me to be something that I don't know how you resolve it, but it seems something to do with language.
No, definitely. I think it's even more deeper than language, right? Because at the end of the day, what you're talking about is that spectrum of emotions, right? And so they can only go from one end to the opposite end. And what I've at least recognized in my work that I've done thus far is the ones who can best describe in the middle. So some of those, like, I'm embarrassed, or I'm ashamed, and nobody is helping me with that piece. And now that matures and manifests into anger after so much shame is put upon me, that there's been no one to come and intervene in the process of that. And then also you have to look at, what environment are they growing up in? Because if they haven't been in an environment where that's been taught to them, and not taught just, as the do as I say, not as I do, but something that can actually experience emotional intelligence. Because let's be honest, how many adults have a problem with telling, their counterparts, whether it be at home in their regular life or at the work life, this doesn't feel good. We're taught we have to bite the bullet and take it as it comes. And that's, it's a bunch of bull. Like, we don't necessarily have to do that. Our feelings are real, our emotions are real, and we should be able to do so. And if young kids don't know how to do that because the adults that are training and raising them haven't instilled that in them, then I would expect for them to just go from one end of the spectrum to the next. And again, I always hear the term that it starts at home. Well, it does start at home, but your home is inside of a community. Your school is inside of a community. And, I tell people all the time, for 10 months of every year, people outside of the home, adults outside of the home are responsible for those kids more than the parents are. You're at home, you're at school 10 hours a day in the school year. You're at home and actually up working probably 6. So the majority of that responsibility, it sucks. And I tell my educators this that I work with all the time, that you were given a responsibility to help instill values in these kids when all you were taught in college was how to teach them arithmetic or reading and language. But now you have to teach them emotional regulation or how to defuse conflict. That's not something in the requirements for an educator, right? But it's something that you have to do to be successful as an educator.
What kind of home did you grow up in?
I grew up in a home for two educators. So both my parents were educators. Also, we had a very close knit family. So I was very close to my grandparents. My grandfather was actually the first black supervisor at McDonnell Douglas, which is now Boeing, foreman on one of the construction floors. My grandmother actually worked in the plant as well. So I grew up in a very close-knit family, like I said. So they had a small family, and we all lived literally within that same community. It's probably why I never left that community, because all my basic needs were met, and my entire family is in that community.
Yeah, there's something I used to say, like when I moved to California, I made this realization that everybody thinks they're moving to California to get away from all the people that they can't get along with, right? And so what you have out in a place like that, San Francisco, is a bunch of individualists, right?
Yeah.
But if you stay in a place like St. Louis, or I make the comparison like South Orange, New Jersey, right? If you stay in one of these towns, you don't stay there because it's beautiful. You stay there because you're knitted into the community. You have, you're a part of that fabric. And it's one of those things that to leave it would be, it would cost you way, no matter how, you would have to make so much more money to be able to offset the loss of the family to watch your kids and connection into other opportunities, whatever that is. It's almost probably impossible to imagine.
No, definitely. And it's funny because being a social worker, people always want to lean on me for emotional and life advice. And one of the things I always encourage people, I always say, go spread your wings, enjoy life, go do some self journeys, figure out what you want to do if you haven't figured out for yourself. But when people say I have to move, the first question is, what are you moving for? Because if you're moving to get away and to reinvent yourself, I'm sorry, but in the world we live in today, your reputation is going to follow you. And if you're moving before your own internal demons, those are going to go with you no matter what. So
it's one of those questions, though, like you look at a dilapidated place, like let's imagine East St. Louis, right? Mm-hmm. And you say, like, hey, people that are here, there's no jobs here. The community that you're in seems quite run down. To me, the obvious answer is to move. But then you kind of run into, like, are they moving out of social situations that are holding them back, or are they leaving? I don't understand what the right question is, but, like, it seems like there's some places where the right answer does seem to be to leave.
Well, I think that's a personal question, right? And so you have to see what is it that's happened to you in that situation that you would have to go. But at the same time, if there are situations that have created if there's a situation that's at a place where people don't have the opportunity to flourish and opportunities to grow, then yeah, you want to leave. But most people don't, from my experiences, haven't had the bandwidth or instilled the skills to really utilize what's around them. So yeah, you look at a place like East St. Louis and you're like, hey, this is run down. There's not that many opportunities. Well, when I look at a place like East St. Louis, I say, man, they could really, really use a fresh produce, convenience store. They could really, really use a place that has non-perishable goods and meets their basic needs, because they have to travel, 10 miles to the nearest Walmart to get so. However, only 12% of the population have a functioning vehicle, and public transit in East St. Louis is almost non-existent outside of the Metrolink line, which could be an additional 2 miles to walk to. So let's think in the midst of the winter and it's 0 degrees, Granny G can't go to get those basic needs met. So yeah, it may make more sense for Granny G to move out to, a more condensed area of Illinois, or even in the metro area, so she can get those basic needs met from a retirement facility. But look at what she's given up. She's given up that home, no matter what the neighborhood is. She's given up that home that she worked to pay off this mortgage over the last 30 years. She's given up the relationships that she has built in the community. She's given up that hierarchy that she created inside of that neighborhood. Everybody, we all have that elderly person in our communities that we know, that we check on, that we recognize, and actually see. I
don't think you're right about that. In fact, I think in my world, like, I don't look in on any, older people. I think that's something that's a part of you and a part of your culture. But I think in suburban culture, I don't think it's the same.
I don't think it's the same either. I mean, I remember getting this question from a friend. I remember actually getting a comment from a friend in high school, and he was saying, he lives in a prominent area, and he's like, Chauncey, can't wait for all of us to come out here and get a house out here. And my response was, I don't want to live out here, because there is no sense of community. Houses are put on 1 acre lots, where in the community that me and Ben work in, they're put on quarter-acre lots, and we're all close together. I think we just saw this out of COVID. You know, when COVID just happened, I was able to reconnect with neighbors I probably hadn't had a real relationship with since I was younger. But again, that is, and you're right, it is my truth, and at the end of the day, there's a cluster of people that are looking for that type of connection inside of their community. I think that is why we're seeing urban renewal be such a big topic across the country. You know, we see plenty of cities that's made a turnaround over the last 10 years. I would like to put up on the block, you know, Denver's probably been one of the biggest ones. You know, we've seen the flood of population out there, of course, with the regulation of cannabis being put in place. You've seen a boom in economic divide, but at the same time, you've also seen different cities too. You know, Atlanta, Dallas, DC, steady turning. You know, we're seeing it in Florida cities as well, Tampa, Fort Lauderdale. These are all cities, I mean, Midwest cities, Cincinnati, Cleveland, you know, Chicago on the south side that's seen plenty of disinvestment and is now making huge turns. You're seeing the real estate market go up 300% in the last 4 years. That's all speaking to people wanting to have that personal connection inside of their community. If not, we would just see more suburban sprawl happening across the country. And we're still seeing that piece, but we're also seeing that revitalization of urban centers as well.
So after we had lunch the other day, I went home and I found this St. Louis American article that you had written, I think, several years ago. So this is an article about you being 18 to 21, somewhere in there, and talking about losing a member of your community. Talk a little bit about that article, because that was really something.
Yeah, man. So, you know, one of my slogans is I wasn't always a social worker, but I also think that, you know, as young adults, that's what we're meant to do. You know, this is probably why I hate cancel culture, right? Because as young adults, as teenagers and emerging adults, we're supposed to make mistakes. We're supposed to go out here and test the limits and see, you know, what's the right niche for us. Unfortunately, though, in certain situations where your basic needs aren't met, they push it a little too far. So, yeah, I had a group of friends that I was running with involved in some pretty dangerous situations.
Like what?
Typical things. So drug trafficking, gang activity, potential acts of violence. I've never seen any myself, but you know, rumors. Whenever there's smoke, there's fire, of course. So yeah, I had some experiences. You know, I don't like to say. I guess some people consider those to be traumatic experiences, and that had to do with, you know, me trying to find my place in the world. You know, I've had, as we talked about, you know, the spectrum, the lived experience being on a spectrum. I've been everywhere from and I say this is one of my slogans. I've been everywhere from the clubhouse all the way down to the barbecue and the projects, right? So and that was probably one of my lows, as I was trying to figure out where I was at, making some bad decisions as a young man, not ready for the responsibility when it was time to go to college, things of that nature. End up linking in with some of the wrong crowds because at that point they were making accomplishments that I thought was due to the financial gains that they were getting, that I thought meant that they were successful. But again, I'm 18 years old and I don't have a full developed brain, so I'm not looking at the risk versus reward. So I ended up losing a good friend to gun violence behind that. And it just switched my gears. You know, and actually his brother, we were sitting there the evening that he was killed, and his brother looked and said, you know, there's only 2 options left for us, and there's death or jail. And I'm like, dude, you're 19, I'm 18. Like, we have other options than that. And I left everything along, and I literally went and enrolled back at school the next day.
When you had experienced that gun violence, was it a total shock? Had you known other people? Was this a random thing? No,
I had known other people. I'd known other people in my family, known other people in the community. This is probably just the one at the current time that was the most closest to me.
Man, this is wild because when I was a kid, I definitely wanted to hang out with the kids that smoke cigarettes. I definitely wanted to be around the kids that they work construction so they could have a nice car, and then we could also drink or we could do whatever. Like, you know, I think that any extroverted guy has that like pull, and it's a little bit like I could be cool, but like The biggest danger we ran into was getting pulled over by a cop for a DUI or something like that, or somebody getting into like a major car accident, right? Like that's how people died where I was from. To imagine that somebody would have malice in their heart enough to go kill another human being that I know is like really hard for me to wrap my mind around, and to have that be a reality of the world that you grow up in, it seems like this stuff of fantasy, no different than me watching stuff come out of Buckingham Palace. Like it's that far away from me.
No, definitely. And so if you really want to lean in, let's lean into that even more, right? So what would make somebody want to kill another person, right? Because like if you were to get caught, the punishment is that you lose your life. In the state of Missouri, the minimum punishment for a homicide is life without the possibility of parole. You have lost your life. You will, of course, you'll be in the system, you'll be in jail, but you have no freedoms whatsoever. You'll be behind bars to the day that you die. So at what point does it take? And this is actually something I talk with some of our older kids that we deal with, our young adults in our program. So what is worth taking another life? You know, and at the end of the day, there is nothing. But so then what brings you to the point of wanting to do so? And it's a state of desperation. And so let's go back to looking at kids as young people. So we talked about adults and what it takes when you're picking what community or neighbor you're going to stay in. But young people who don't have that option because they have to follow whoever is responsible for their well-being. And if their basic needs are getting met, eventually you get tired of being the victim and you take it into your own hands. And so now it becomes, I think me and you've had this conversation before, you know, it becomes looking at the structure of obedience and law, right? And it's like, okay, yeah, it's illegal for me to take another life. However, is it okay for me to go on starving when there's no options for me to eat? Is it okay for me to live in uninhabitable situations when I know there is, if I just had an additional $500 a month? And something that minuscule, like $5, literally will make or break someone's life and likelihood and them being able to see their basic needs get met. And so, you know, that's one of the things that I've always, you know, said, and I've always said this, I'll be the sacrificial lamb. I will figure out a way for you to get that additional money, that additional resource, so you do not have to make those same decisions, so you can change the way that you think, so you can focus on your future and not the present where you're not getting your basic needs met.
Yeah, before I went to Kenya, for the Peace Corps, my dad, you know, pulled me aside and he's like, "Now, Vance, the biggest difference between you and the people that you're going to be with," and he's like, "you won't really understand this until much later, is that they don't know anyone that knows anyone that can help them." And my dad was making reference to the fact that I was like, I've been poor. I've had like $10 in my account before and not been able to buy, or only buying ramen noodles, or barely able to pay my rent or whatever. And my dad was like, yeah, but at the end of the day, if something really did happen, there are people that would come through for you. But if you're living in an existence where you don't even know anyone that can help you out, and I don't know if the same is true for Kenya as the people you're talking about, but it does frame shift what desperation feels like, because I was always like, all right, well, if I really can't eat, I've really got other options. Is that what you're talking about?
No, definitely. And a lot of people don't have other options. A lot of people are in that same situation, and it's sad, but it's real.
I think this is really hard for people to wrap their minds around.
Okay, well, like I said, I'm a research guy, so let's throw some statistics at it, right? So let's look at Syria. Syria has no controlling government right now, and it's a free fall, right? So North City of St. Louis has an infant mortality rate 1.2% lower than the ungoverned country of Syria.
Oh my God.
Exactly. So you cannot tell me that these people aren't in desperate situations if we in the greatest country in the world, in the richest country in the world, have issues like that happening right in the heart of our city.
Yeah, infant mortality is one of those things that, like, everybody can get their hearts around that one. That's like, you're talking about a mother that's incredibly vulnerable. You're talking about a baby that is nothing but potential, right? And to lose a child at the rate of what's going on in Syria seems crazy. So what's going on there? Why does that happen?
I mean, it's a few things. Again, we're going back to basic needs being met. We can look at every public health disparity across the board, and you can check a box in certain situations. And it's not just North City, because, you know, there's plenty of, because again, St. Louis is a very segregated city, so North City by itself is somewhere in the 90th percentile for African Americans. However, outside of race, Bayless hits just as many of the public health disparities as as North City does, which is a prominent, white South County suburb. So at the end of the day, it's not necessarily just a race thing, but what is going on is lack of education, lack of basic needs, lack of access to health care, lack of quality jobs for these mothers, and then also again, you're looking at the trajectory from previous generations, not having the ability to help, like you said, not having access to health care. To assistance for child care, not having that extra support that you'll need. A lot of times, these mothers go out and they ask them, also the other piece is shame. I remember talking to a nurse about this, and they asked, hey, do you plan on breastfeeding? The mother was like, yeah. She had never even looked at it, knew how to do it, was just holding the baby thinking it would latch on. That's not how it works. A lot of the deaths have to do with SIDS. Like, so these mothers aren't educated, the society isn't educated, and there's no additional help or resources to bring to them so they can actually get these things met, to put a barrier in place so we don't see something like that happening. And I put the infant mortality piece on there because who wants to see babies die? Like, at the end of the day, if you can hear that statistic and walk away, I'm going to start questioning your own personal morals. Yeah,
so part of my job in Kenya was that I was at a neonatal clinic. So I watched all these pregnant mamas come in, and a big thing of what I saw, so these people were terribly impoverished, right? You're talking about people living on dirt floors, no electricity, running water out of cisterns. Maybe they have it. But what they had that doesn't exist now is this like deep interconnected community, right? So if you were a mama and you just had a baby, you went out and worked maybe a week after you had that baby, but you're also there with grandmas, great grandmas, little girls. All these people are taking care of the kids. You've watched kids grow up your whole life. You've seen that breastfeeding going on. American culture, whether you're talking about black or white or poor or rich or anything, it's not comprised that way.
No, I mean, it's all, and unfortunately, I say this as a real estate investor, but unfortunately, it ends up being all about the money piece, right? Early childhood health care is the most expensive education that you'll ever pay for. That zero to kindergarten age, so that 0 to 4, maybe 3 or 4 or 5, is the most expensive education that any parent will pay for.
I mean, I'm going through this right now, and you got to have like 2-year waiting periods to get into some of these places, and they're charging like $2,000 a month or something like that.
It's just as expensive as Ivy League, and it's a harder admissions process. Like, it's really ridiculous. So it's all based off of the capitalist mindset, which is fine. I will tell people all the time. People always ask, or am I more conservative, or liberal, Democrat, or Republican? I just tell them I'm a capitalist. Like, so at the end of the day, I totally get that piece, but it's a money grab. And that's also the other part too of it. We look at mass media and everybody says, this is what we're supposed to strive to be at. But that is once you have the ability and the surplus that you can strive to get all the glitz and the glamour, the gold and jewelries, or the nicer homes and things like that. But the first piece is, are you living in a safe, habitable environment? Like, is there water leaking through your roof and it rains? Then let's focus on fixing that before we focus on getting a new car. If you have, and it's more about being appreciative of what we have. I think, in all honesty, most of society is being lied to through mass media, because it's a supply and demand. So if we could create the demand, we produce a supply so we can get rich off of it.
Yeah, and I mean, so I would go and say, my personal belief is a lot of the reason that the child care is as expensive as it is because government regulation makes it so you have so many hoops to come through. Like, I was talking with this person that was like, if I'm going to run a daycare, I have to have a master's degree at this point if I'm going to run the daycare. And then I can only hire, so many people without a college degree. And then the rest of the people have to have this special education and this special certification. And a lot of that came about as we started saying, well, we want more safety. We want to make sure that this accident that happened here, or this bad thing that happened here, can't ever happen. So let's create a rule. And every rule you put in place is now going to amortize the cost of that rule across everybody. And then you start having all the places that used to do it, the churches and the community groups, say it's too expensive. We're not able to make money, or we're not able to find people that can pay it around this neighborhood.
No, definitely. And I think one of the other components of it is not only just the government regulations, but also, looking at this piece, we're still handing our kids off to a company, essentially, right? Education system is definitely ran like a company. So, in doing so, what parents are going to check for is, I'm willing to, if I can afford to pay you this $1,400 a month for early childhood care, that's fine. But I want to see the procedures put in place to make sure that my child is protected throughout the tenure while they're here. And the best way to do this is, here's our handbook with all our rules and regulations to make sure that if anything happens, your child is number one priority. Well, hogwash. You're seeing anywhere from 60 to 300 kids in the early childhood center. Like and you're staffed by 20 people. Accidents are going to happen. This kids fall, kids get hurt. But as soon as that happens, now it's going to be just the pointing of the finger game. And so now we're looking at liability and insurance, and now that is an increased cost. And God forbid somebody gets sued, tuition goes up for everybody.
Yeah. So you were talking about COVID in your neighborhood. What's going on with vaccines and people following mask mandates where you're at?
So the mask mandate is not a big deal. I think most people are falling either within that or the social distancing piece. I even seen neighbors, they make sure they stay within, or at least the one concrete plot, which is a good, 3 feet away on top of the distance that they are on there. So that people are staying there 6 feet or better away. Masked up inside of stores is not a problem. I've seen that for the most part. I haven't seen any Karens or get kicked out of any places for any reasons.
Where you go, everybody's wearing masks?
For the most part, yeah.
Man, where I go, maybe 40% are wearing masks.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest again on this piece. It's not like we have a bunch of grocery stores and patron places in our community. Most things are inside the community. So vaccination, I treat that almost, especially right now with it being such a sensitive topic, I treat that almost as of like politics, religion, and finances. I kind of leave that alone on a personal basis. But if people open up and talk to me about it, I would say, just based off of my conversation, it's probably about a 50-50, and what's actually surprising is I get more elders that say that they've been vaccinated than, your working age or your young people who are actually qualified to be vaccinated.
It's I think you're exactly right about it being the same thing as religion and politics, and maybe it's the ultimate religion and politics put together, because at the end of the day it is faith, right? You have faith that this thing you're putting into your arm is this thing, and it also opens up doors and it lets people okay, if you've done it and you're willing to prove it to other people, now you get access to all of the community. What do you think over the long term, the community you're in, with the 50% that aren't taking it? Is this a permanent thing? They're not taking it, period? Or is it we'll wait and see? How do you see this playing out?
So this is strictly off assumption and opinion, so it's not factual, but I will say that based off of the people that I've talked to in my community and other communities, if they haven't gotten vaccinated, they probably won't. At this point, even more, right now what we're seeing is lotteries and incentives to get vaccinated. That just draws more red flags for people.
Yeah, I was going to say, doesn't that sound, I think that's
yeah, like really though, because I had a neighbor tell me just recently, it was like, nobody's ever given me anything, and all of a sudden you want to give me $50 just to get a shot, and it's like, nah, like I don't trust it. So it becomes those type of conversations, and I just let them, if they want to open up about it. I don't even talk about my status with people, just because I don't want to get into that conversation. So I leave it alone. But, if people want to open up to me about it, that's totally fine. I just do the nah thing. Okay. But at the end of the day, and of course, everybody either advocates for not getting it or getting it, depending on what choice they made. But yeah, I thought it was kind of, lack of better words. I thought it was kind of questionable too when people you're trying to incentivize things to an untrusty group, right? It's like, we already don't trust you as a collective group. Like, well, now you want to give me money thinking that you could buy me into getting vaccinated. Like I would raise an eyebrow too if I was coming from that perspective.
When you say like they already don't trust, the powers that be or the government, tell me a little bit about that.
I mean, so I think looking at going back to what we started off when we were talking about me and Ben working in this blighted area around community development, that's not by mistake, it's by design. We're working in a community just north of Delmar, and in that community,
So for people that don't know, the Delmar Divide is kind of where they say is like the poverty impoverished line is north of that, and south of that is where you have the WashUs and the SLUs and the universities and the hospital systems and everything. And so if you go north of Delmar, that's just kind of like I wouldn't compare it to Compton, but something, you're going north somewhere.
Actually, I would compare it to Compton. Actually, if you look at the housing market, I know the cost of living is significantly cheaper in St. Louis than it is in LA. So if you go north of Delmar, household median income I don't quote me on the new census, but last census that came out, household median income was $70,000. You cross over Delmar, south of Delmar, household median income is like $180,000, right? So it's more than double that piece. The price of your house north of Delmar is around $60,000. The price of a home south of Delmar is around $350,000. So those statistics by itself start to raise flags, and so then you start looking, okay, well, going back to it, well, people's needs aren't going to be met. And anybody who's opened up a business, whether it's franchise, whether it's just your mom and pop shop, if you start doing a market analyst report and saying, okay, well, where I'm going to put my brick and mortar business at, and you look at something like that, it's like, why would I put it over here? I'm going to be in the red for the next 30 years where I could actually see a profit in 3 to 5 years if I just go down the street a quarter mile. And I understand it from a business perspective, but we're forgetting about a huge population of people in the process. And this is why one of the narratives that, me and Ben and the group that we work with always talk about is the disinvestment that's happened over decades. And so even if you go from one side of Delmar to the next, the housing structures don't change. What changes is the work that's been able to be put in because of the surplus of capital in one confined area compared to the next. So we have just as many beautiful historic homes built in the same era.
Oh yeah, the neighborhood you guys are in, I mean, Fountain Park is like gorgeous, right? Like it's like you would, no one in the United States right now is building neighborhoods like that one.
I mean, and even more specifically, that's the only neighborhood in the city like that one. So we have the only neighborhood with a residential oval park in the middle of our neighborhood. Now, of course, other neighborhood has parks, but to have that oval in the middle of it, we're the only one. We have a fountain that's over 100 years old in the middle of that park.
And so I kind of hijacked what you were saying before to clarify Delmar, but tell me about the concerns that people have about the government.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, it goes back to that whole disinvestment, right? And as we talked about education, you talk about regulations. Well, there's housing regulations, just like anything else. And so in doing so, like I said, just actually in our neighborhood, there was one of the biggest housing regulations back in the day was redlining. And Fountain Park at Lewis Place, more specifically Lewis Place, was when that conservation was lifted was the first community that you saw that flood of prominent African Americans. So that was in 1949. The Shelley family went all the way up to the federal Supreme Court, had the case that lifted that housing conservation that says that African Americans can live in their neighborhood. Within 20 years, it was the mecca of upper middle class. It was plenty of black lawyers and doctors that lived in these communities. Well, then other regulations came around, and so you start seeing disinvestment into these communities around such, and so you start seeing a surplus of homes and investment on south of Delmar and almost forgotten about north of Delmar. And I hate to, because I don't like to pull the race card. It's not my thing. But at some point you have to say, well, what was the only difference in this play? Like I said, they're doctors and lawyers. These are prominent positions still to this day. In certain cultures, if you're not a doctor or a lawyer, you're a failure. So if you have that prominent of a profession and you're starting to see regulations put in place that prohibit you to succeed on a state level per laws or federal level per laws, then what else can we attribute to it? And I will leave that out for a question for your listeners and other people to push back on, because I was looking for educational piece.
And so what time period was this going on in that you're describing?
The 40s.
The 40s. So before a Pruitt I Go comes in.
Yeah. Definitely. And Pruitt-Igoe was segregated. I don't know if most people know that, but those Pruitt and Igoe were two separate buildings. Pruitt was black, Igoe was white.
No kidding.
Yeah, most people don't know that.
I didn't know that. I actually really know almost nothing about Pruitt-Igoe other than it was a disaster. Everything they tried to do, like forward thinking, like from the not being able to change the light bulbs out to, didn't work. But what is your take on Pruitt-Igoe?
I think Pruitt-Igoe was the beginning of new regulations around housing, and more specifically, not just housing, but social services, to say, if you need said services, here's the criteria that you need to meet. And we still see that today in, for instance, housing authority and housing structures, right? Excuse me. Most people are not going to get a housing voucher from the housing authority if it's a two-parent family. There we go. 2-parent family, 2-head household family. So if you have 2 incomes coming in, they're not going to get a housing voucher. So that is a policy that started in Pruitt-Igoe. And that's a prime example of what we're going to continue to see across the board with regulations. So you're going to, and it goes back. You do a case study, see what works, see what doesn't work, see what the extreme need is, and we have to cap it somewhere because we can't just hand out free. This isn't it's not a social society. We're not communists, so we have to draw the line somewhere on what we're willing to help with.
Yeah, and a bureaucracy knows no nuance, right?
Exactly.
We're putting in a rule. To me, when I look at the statistics, like just in the latest census, right, where we now have 40% or something like that of all children are born out of to a single parent, but in the Black community, it's something like 70%.
Yeah, it's pretty high. I know it's more than 50.
I mean, like, to me, having just raised, I've got a 1-year-old right now, right? Like, I cannot imagine raising a child by yourself, but then on top of that, having all the challenges of, having to ride the bus to go to the grocery store, making an income that's, $12 or $13 an hour. To me, it is inevitable that the outcomes of that will be bad.
No, definitely. And I think this goes back to why we need communities to be self-sustaining and have its own ecosystems. And I actually think that COVID and new technology has brought us back to those old terms, right? So when you're talking about making America great, it's because that people were able to, we also have the analogy of, pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. Well, inside of a community, you have access to all of those things. It's when you feel like you have to go outside the community to get those things met. People just need the educational aspects, and there's someone to come and help them put it in place. And once you get those wheels turning, it becomes an effect, right? So we can look at other statistics too. In other communities, the dollar transfers for months on end, right? In the Jewish community, I think it's somewhere around like 3 years, which is the longest.
Meaning that if you go spend a dollar at a flower shop in the Jewish community, then that flower shop owner goes and spends it at the grocery store, and then he goes and spends it at the buys a dress for his wife, and then just keeps going around.
Definitely. And if you look at, I use the Jewish community because we can look at parts of St. Louis, like if you look at U City where the synagogue is, that they circulate that business inside of that community for a very long time. Like I say, that dollar stays in there on average 3 years. Well, in the African American community, again, very much segregated here in St. Louis City, that dollar stays in circulation about 48 seconds because there aren't business owners that are able to put that in place. Now, we have plenty of, one of the terms that's going around a lot right now is economic development, and people are really trying to ramp it up and help minorities, Black and brown people get access to either financial backing, loans, and get them brick and mortars up and running in these communities to start creating these ecosystems. But it has to be an all hands on deck from a 3-tier approach, right? We talk, you brought up my own personal story about gun violence. We have to do something about public safety first and foremost. But but my thoughts behind it is if you focus on the housing and get people quality housing, because everybody doesn't want to be a homeowner. I know that's the old way to get to wealth is home ownership, but everybody doesn't want that. That comes with a lot of responsibility that I just don't think that some people in our generation generation are made for nowadays. But then the next piece is making sure people's basic needs are met with resources. And once you do that, now people can start getting their wheels turning on what is it you actually want to do, and is there something that we could do right here in this community to make it to make it feasible and sustainable inside of this ecosystem. One of my mentors told me one thing that he believes that every community needs is a hub. We need that hub so we can have these hard conversations and then start these think tanks and draw that attention. I say this as coming from a very low income community. I've been privileged enough to own a few rental properties. My neighbor owns a few rental properties, but no one would even believe that there are real estate developers and investors right inside of this community. But if we were to concentrate that in our community instead of outside communities, we could really start to have that transitional change at one community at a time. I think that some of these institutions have a great approach to it. I think WashU has done a great job in the Forest Park Southeast neighborhood and how they've created a corridor that meets their basic needs and also drives revenue from outside communities. Plenty of people come on the weekend into there to bring that money back into that community. You're seeing where over 30% of the residents are still in place over a 10-year span of development, and just the housing stock that they've created. They have that whole spectrum of home ownership and housing. They have everything from low income, the affordable housing and the housing voucher play, to that medium up to $180,000 homes, up to $300,000, $400,000 homes, all within a 30 block radius. Those are the perfect examples of what needs to happen. Chicago did a great job at Lincoln Park. Cincinnati is doing a great job just east of their downtown. Detroit, even though they've had their issues, is starting to see a huge turnaround with their housing stock. And it's all due because they're hitting it from all the approaches and they're getting that group of people corralled together with the same agenda.
You had a fascinating turn of phrase when we met for lunch that really blew my mind. We were talking about the value of churches in communities, and that's, your communities or my communities. When I grew up, that was the center of everything. But those have gone away and have been replaced by what you called the nonprofit industrial complex. Talk about that for a little bit.
Oh, definitely. So, if you go back to it, and this is a perfect transition because, those hubs used to be the churches, right? The churches used to be where everybody went to go get their basic needs met. Also, if you're talking about pre the civil rights movement, this is where your black engineer who couldn't get a job at a engineering company would be would be an engineer for the church, or have a prominent position in the church, whether it be a deacon or a trustee on the board. But on his regular 9 to 5 may have been a bus driver. So this is a perfect example of what a community hub would have been. So these churches used to have the opportunity, and we still have a couple. I like to shout out to Friendly Temple Baptist Church here in St. Louis. I think they're doing a great job over in the Martin Luther King corridor, where they have really started to meet a lot of those basic needs. They have everything but a market, and I'm pretty sure, knowing their pastor Mike Jones, he's probably in the process of putting a grocery store up there pretty soon. So outside of that, though, that is where those hubs started and the idea from there. Somewhere along the lines, though, churches, and I can't speak to why, but I can say that churches no longer we're meeting the basic needs of the people. And I don't know if that because we started seeing a number of churches grow and congregations split into smaller, because again, it's about having that collective of people.
Yeah, you can only have about 130 families in a church, and once it gets above that, then you've got separate churches inside of that. It's not stable much beyond 130.
And so that's where I go back to the leadership, right? Good leaders are able to corral those different churches and get people's, that bureaucracy, get people's needs met. I just had a conversation with one of the stakeholders me and Ben works closely with, and he brought up an old quote. I forgot it, but who said it, but it's in a good negotiation, nobody comes out happy, right? Everybody has to give up something in order to get a piece of what they want so they collectively can come together. So nobody's going to ever get 100% of what we want, but that is what compromise is for. But I think in doing so, if people are willing to stick it out for the long haul, you're able to see so. These churches used to be able to do so. I think I hear about churches, even the family church that my family goes to used to have 4,000 members in there, right? That blows my mind today. I hear about it in other settings, but most of the times those are the ones I see on TV, and I don't necessarily see them actually doing the more concrete work on the ground floor. And also, those are the churches where we have people traveling from different communities all over. The black church used to be in black communities as a central hub, and they bonded together around specific needs. So, for instance, I'll bring up the the Birmingham bus boycott, where pastors from through the South and Midwest came together. We see Martin Luther King as the face behind it, but there was plenty of pastors and ministers, black ministers, that came behind together to rally that up. And with those domestic carpools that they were having around the bus boycott, they literally almost shut down the transit system for the whole state of Alabama. And it's that type of influence that the black church used to have in black communities, and band together, where pastors were taking people from work for their regular 9-to-5s during the week, that we don't necessarily see that type of on the ground leadership. And it goes back to, what type of leader do we want to see? Do we want to see the floor general that's leading their soldiers in the battle, or do we want to see the dictators from the balcony that's just demanding orders? And I just can't get with the latter.
I think that one of the things that churches did was help people develop their leadership skills, because within every single church, whether you're talking about, St. Luke's Catholic Church in Eureka, Illinois, or the Friendly Baptist Church, like, that minister isn't doing things alone, right? Mm-hmm. They maybe seem like they're on top, and they're the ones that have the final say, but they got the women's group, they've got the Bible study, they've got church, like the Sunday school, they've got all these different, the choir, all of these little hierarchies where people are meeting, they're seeing each other, they're checking in on one another, they're probably gossiping about each other, which has some social goodness to it, right? Like if you are a little bit concerned about what your parishioners are going to think of you, it might keep you a little bit more on the straight and narrow. And then you see young people getting to watch, how do you actually get along with a group of people when it's not possible for you to be like, I don't like them, so I'm going to go yell and scream in their face, because you got to see them next week and the week after that and for years and years and years, because you don't choose who else shows up to church. And all of that, when church attendance starts falling away, your community or mine, then you lose things that we don't even have names for, because they were so deeply embedded into our culture. It goes hundreds of years, thousands of years back.
No, definitely. And so, just outside of the church, because I want to lean back into the nonprofit piece, right? So the church has definitely created that bonding that you had to do, and I agree with you on that part. And so when we look at these new nonprofits, these mega nonprofits, it's all for salary. In the church, nobody got a check. Now you received.
There were some ministers that make money.
Oh, well, definitely.
People make money in those situations.
Well, I'm thinking about the era of the civil rights movement. I remember going through a course, and I was reading a book, and Fannie Lou Hamer said this out of Mississippi, right? It wasn't the fact that we got money to do this, but yeah, we would get food donations, or Miss Johnson would cook dinner for the whole congregation type deal, and the ones who were doing the work, she would make sack lunches throughout the week. So that's so of course it equated to finances, but we didn't have to come out. There was different incentives besides just here's an actual fiscal check.
Absolutely,
that you walk away
with. And you weren't measuring let's quantitatively measure how well the success was. It was, hey, did the parishioner get what they needed? And now it's, did we meet the metrics that we need in order to be able to get more grants?
Yeah, exactly, right. And that's where I think the biggest difference came into play was, did we make an impact? Did we solve the problem? And when we solve these problems, the incentive comes along, right? And so this goes back to the saying, I keep hearing this over and over again, do what you love, you never work a day. Well, because you're never looking at the financial reward that you're getting out of it. As you keep working, you're just just meeting the needs or your responsibilities, and you're like, I'm able to meet my basic needs in life as well. But on that nonprofit piece, the biggest reward is how much grant money did we receive this year? You know, we're going for about 3 grants right now, just currently that's due next week. And all of them was like, what's your financial report? What's your financial report? I understand where it's coming from. That's the life that we live in nowadays. But at the same time, it's also like, ask me about the problems that we solve. Ask me about the data and the impact that we've made, and fund those guys. And that's what I really like to do. I like to see the small guys get a shot, because the big guys have forgotten the reason why we're at the table in the first place sometimes.
Well, I see that. I mean, you know, so I had a chance to see the Clinton Global Initiative, right? Mm-hmm. So the way that they were dispensing money, I mean, they had hundreds of millions of dollars, and we could go way into that. But the biggest thing that I noticed is that they were like, we're going to change the KPIs, the key performance indicators, because we want them to be X and Y and Z, and this is our great addition. And so people were saying, okay, but we're going to need to have like 4 or 5 people just to spend all day long creating the reports that allow us to be able to fulfill your thing. And they're like, well, just add it into the grant, and then you can add 4 more people, and then you've got more people you're employing, and then look at how this works. So when I heard your term, the nonprofit industrial complex, I was like, oh my God, that is the name for what's going on here. There is you don't benefit by solving the problem and reducing the size of the staff. Like, that's failure, right? If a nonprofit lowers how many people are working on their staff the next year, that's not a good thing. That's not like the engineer that didn't have a job and became a deacon for a little while. Mm-hmm. You don't want him necessarily to only be a deacon. You'd love to see him get his engineering job and move on and shrink the staff, and because it's a part of a fabric as opposed to a quantitative industry.
No, definitely, right, and that's what we're falling back in. That's what we need to fall back into, is to that space. Right now, what we keep seeing is that fiscal responsibility on the nonprofits to say, hey, here's what we think we can hit. Here's how much we can. Here's how many problems we can solve with just this amount of money. And it's like, okay, cool. I hear what you're saying, but at the end of the day, like, how are you justifying that? And as you said it right now, you know, I'm thinking my data guy is $100 an hour, but if I don't have him, like, I don't have any grants to go out here and deliver these services. Where that shouldn't be the case, and that is not where we should be alluding to moving forward, along with, you know, meeting the basic needs and serving the people that actually need these services, that whoever we're providing. And so when you start looking at people that just are making that grant language up, my fear is, and I get this all the time, I love diving into people's grant proposals if I ever get a chance to look at them, or their 990s. I'll jump on there and see that too, because the next thing is, I'll read something they applied for, and I want to call and see if they actually do this work. I want to see, like, how far in depth can I push them to say, yes, this is what we do, this is what we allude to, type deal, or was it just a money grab? And this is where that nonprofit industrial complex really falls into play, because it starts to become more of, again, I think I said this earlier, a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. Let's address this problem, but we're going to say we can only effectively hit 30%. Well, based off the Department of Social Services, 30% means that you're effective, and we're going to fund you double next year. And not to reach 60%, but so you can spread that arm out and saying, hey, instead of saying, you know, we saw 1,000 clients and 300 were successful, we can say we saw 2,000 clients and 600 was successful, instead of deep diving into that 1,000 clients. And so that is kind of that complex, right? Just like any other company, we hit a certain benchmark and we open up a new store, and we just continue this cycle.
Well, and you were saying before we turned the cameras on about, like, the work that you actually are doing, like the qualitative work for somebody that runs a nonprofit like yours is, a kid gets in a fight at school, the school's ready to expel him, and your role is to come in and say, like, all right, let's figure out what's going on here.
Yeah, so it's about assessing the situation and the whole environment, and not just that one problem, right? My business partner, she says all the time, it's not what happened, but what happened to you, right? And so that's one of the things I always lead into, because usually by the time I've gotten a kid, they've seen the principal, they've seen the teacher, they've had these referrals. So the first thing I always ask them is not what did you do, not what happened. So what happened to you? And just that by itself, you will see the tension be relieved in a young person. But in doing so, again, like I said, I'm all about the quantitative stuff. We have to have that piece, that data mark. I love to see that part. I love to see that, our success rate is 72% compared to the national average being 30. So, but what I care even more about is that interpersonal connection with these young people, so they actually see someone that gets it and has removed the imagery of what success has looked like, because the status quo has said this is what success is supposed to be, and has now looked at them as an individual person with rights, with needs that need to be met, with a premise that of coming from a premise of understanding, and not trying to label and say, okay, well, here's the issue, here's the problem, here's how we're going to fix it. Because everything is a unique situation. Nothing's cookie cutter. I always say that's one of the best things about my job is no 2 days are alike, which means that I always have to go in, I can't go in there with blinders. Every new situation, all cards have to be back on the table, because what worked for Johnny is not going to work for Billy. And until we start recognizing, and not only just in social and emotional learning, but in the educational system, this is where we start to see kids be called failures. It's funny. I just saw a quote earlier, says the A students work for the B students, the B students work for the C students, the D students run the company, and the F students are the board members. Because it's about the creative mindset and the creative thinking, and whenever you're able to be successful outside of what the status quo tells you success is supposed to look like, and you can still do what the status quo does on top of it, you're gonna go light years past your common man.
Yeah, there's something to be said for the A student being the golden child, right? They figured out, how do I mimic what other people want me to do so that I can get this A? And whether or not F students are on the board, I don't know for sure, but I know the people that weren't so focused on making the teacher happy are often way, way more creative and coming up with solutions to solve the problem that don't necessarily have to be with the way you've done it before.
No, definitely. Again, my dad was an educator and a principal for almost 40 years. And one of the things he always told me, he said, Chauncey, I wasn't the best student, right? I was a good C student, right? And so when my dad told me, he said, Chauncey, you have all the charisma in the world. And he said, charisma takes you far, and education takes you far too. It's when you have both that you'll succeed everybody else. And that, I think that was probably halfway through my high school years where I really started to buckle down. It wasn't the fact that you had to get the education, but it was the discipline that came along with it. And if you had that level of discipline with that charisma, and I hate to say this because I'm not saying this for every A students, I know some pretty charismatic A students, but the ones that are the people pleasers that are just trying to fit a box that may not be their authentic self, are going to have, from my experience, most of them have lost who they are authentically, and never really get that back, because it's a practice and it's a part of your personality. And if you bury it long enough, you'll forget it even exists.
Yeah, or not have the courage to be able to live it out.
Exactly.
So, a few months ago, we had a mayoral election in St. Louis, and I had the mayoral candidate, Kara Spencer, on the podcast one time. She's an interesting person. She was talking about all the things that were going on and making the case for, because for people that don't know, the people in the county, like where I live, don't vote for the mayor of St. Louis City, but it has a huge impact, right? Mm-hmm. So you were the first person I'd ever encountered that was like, hey, you should give Tashara Jones a different, a chance. She's got some new ideas. So make the pitch for people that don't know anything at all about Tashara Jones. Why give her a chance when I think a lot of people in the county were thinking Kara Spencer was the one they wanted to see win?
Well, first I have to see, in all honesty, first I have to see why people wanted to, was so eager to see Kara. So, I had an opportunity to meet Kara on a walk audit about a month ago. I had known some people that have worked with her. One of my assistants and partners in crime was working with the Progressive Caucus, was with Kara as a part of, and did some consulting work for them. So I've only heard great things about Kara. The Tashara play. My biggest thing is I'm going to go back to what I said about, bringing all the cards on the table. I don't know why people canceled Tashara. Everything that I had heard had been around her dad. And I hate to hold people,
the sins of the father shouldn't
there
go
we
on the
go.
child.
Yeah. So again, I hate to see that piece of it, right? So, I had an opportunity to meet with Tashara one-on-one a couple times, and talk to her about what her visions were, what she saw. Everything that she was saying aligned with what with what I think would be a great approach around the cancel piece. Nothing that we had seen in previous administrations, not only lighters but slaves. I did not see Tashara, dismiss those workings. If anything, what I saw was her giving more people opportunities than just the power structures that already existed. So that's where I really was like, okay, maybe she does get it in the light that she's willing to have open dialogue, and if you're not a part of this fraternity that already exists, then you're shut out, right? And I say that I work with that fraternity on a regular as well, but everybody also knows that I'm all for shifting, not necessarily shifting, but throwing a wrench into the power struggle to see how people move. When we get too comfortable in our positions, a lot of times we don't see the pushback or try to come up with new strategies and approaches to how we're going to fix a certain situation. What worked even 5 years ago may not work today. And so when I see someone like Tashara come into play, and her dialogue may make people uneasy around whatever she's saying, I like those type of things. I think that draws people to start thinking creatively and get the wheels turning again. Okay, well, how do I approach the situation with this with potentially a new power structure in play, a new administration in play? So how do I shift my thinking to approach this person? And at the end of the day, what anybody who knows that those at the top of these power structures is, the play always is the same. It never changes. So in doing so, now for me, it's going back to some of the metaphors and examples we used earlier. You do we get the bus driver who has an engineering degree to the table to give him an opportunity to see if he works with it, right? And when you're in the government regulations and they're saying, hey, we want you to give the little guy an option or a chance, well, that should be coming out. We're going to put up the finances for you to give the little guy a chance. For me, that looks like a win-win situation. So you're saying I don't have to come out of any capital. I potentially can grow my staffing out just by giving somebody who I don't know, don't trust, but are willing to build a relationship to make ease with our local elected official. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, you were. I was really just around one sphere of people, and so you were the first person to be like, I don't know, man. She's trying to break up the old boys networks, and that's going to make some people uncomfortable, and they're not going to like that. And I was like, that's true. And in particular, I've moved to a bunch of different cities, and I've tried to get involved in things, and you're like, they don't want me here. I'm not a part of this. And so there is something to be said for breaking that up. You let any one power structure hang around for too long, then you start developing an inability for things to change at all. So I was just glad you brought it up, and I wanted to give you a chance to chat about it.
No, yeah, and I think that's exactly it, though. Just the simple fact that more than anything, because I don't think it's going to break up anything, right? So certain power structures that have been in place for too long that you won't break it up, but to get people to start rethinking, or start thinking differently in their approaches and the ways they do things. I mean, let's think about it. We talked about your network. Your network is your net worth, and ideally most people who don't have a large and extensive network will see a cap on their net worth. And I think that when somebody comes in and can throw a wrench in the way that people think, and not just, hire the next one up who I know and I can trust, but give other people a shot, they may exceed the expectations that you had for the person that you want to put in place in the first place. I think that's fun and exciting. I do not I like excitement. I like a challenge. And I think more than anything, if there's a challenge to be done and you have the charisma and the skill set, you're going to succeed no matter who's in power. But I never want to take the easy route out. I always go for the underdog.
So, Chauncey, this has been a really good conversation. If people wanted to learn more about your nonprofit and the work that you guys do, or just kind of to find out more, where would they go?
Oh, yeah. So go to Chaos Inc. That's Chaos with a K, KHAOS Inc.org, excuse me. So they actually, social worker stands for Keep Healing and Overcoming Struggles. So we're a social and emotional learning organization. We also have ANA Inspirations, which is a private therapy company as well. So if you need psychotherapy as well, come in and see us on that piece as well. As well, from the community organization aspect, if you want to go to Park Place Housing and Economic Development, we are a community development corporation focused north of Delmar, and right now primarily 2 communities, Fountain Park and Lewis Place, trying to make sure that people get their needs met and we get this ecosystem up and running.
Who would be a good person to contact that group? Like, who are the types of people you want to see showing up?
Oh man, we want to see it across the board. Like I said, the more the merrier, right? So I want to see community organizers, activists that get it. I want to see people that can bring in skill sets and resources. Definitely developers. We're really ramping that up. We just got approval, and we'll see 200 unit apartment going up on Delmar market rate. We're looking at a senior living facility with 52 units, with all new and interesting layout. So it's going to be a lot of amenities that focus on elderly who may have some dementia. So that's going to be kind of fun to see of that piece. We just had an application go through with Rise, a local nonprofit builder, to put up some low income housing. So we want to see some more people, some private developers come through and redo some of these historical homes we have over in Fountain Park. We're also doing a capital contribution campaign right now to rehab that fountain. Over, like I said, is 114 years old. It's a beautiful fountain. We want to get it back up and running.
Well, man, I'm rooting for you, and Ben was 100% right. You're like one of the most interesting conversationalists, and I'm just glad you and Ben cross paths, because it seems like you guys are doing good things.
Yeah, let's see. Give us a couple more years when we can knock off some of these benchmarks. But thanks, Vance, for having me.
Thanks, Chauncey.
Appreciate it.